Culling has begun at farms in North County Louth after foot and mouth is confirmed. Share prices tumble, but some good news, the Commission to treat Louth as a separate region. The teachers' pay dispute, the sides say they're willing to go back to the Labour court. Decommissioning body reports no movement on arms dumps, but more talks expected soon. Good evening and welcome. The culling of thousands of sheep and cattle is continuing tonight following confirmation of the Republic's first case of foot and mouth at a farm in County Louth. The slaughter of 3,000 sheep and up to 1,000 cattle within a 1 kilometre radius of the farm was announced by the Minister Joe Walsh. The outbreak occurred at Proleek, which is about 4 miles from the North's only outbreak at Mai in County Armagh. The exclusion zone has now been extended to cope with the outbreak in Louth and will run from the mouth of the Fane River south of Dundalk to Hackball's Cross, the Cooley Peninsula and up to the border. Tonight, the EU Commission has agreed to treat County Louth as a separate region so that food exports from the rest of the country won't be halted.
The culling of animals belonging to the Rice family began late this afternoon. Department of Agriculture vets began killing 650 sheep and around 130 cattle on the family's 7 holdings. The animals will be buried on Michael Rice's lands. The family is well respected in the Louth farming community.
I was speaking to them last night and they were hopeful that it would be clear, and they're literally devastated at this. But in the midst of their own grief, their own shock, very, very concerned about their neighbours and the impact this will have on people with young families and on a total community.
It was the news no one had wanted. Louth farmers got confirmation that their worst fears had been realised at 10:30 this morning.
I think, number one, it means a big change of life in the peninsula, probably in the whole county, but in our area, we just had come alive after years of being in the doldrums. We have a great tourism trade business in it, and it's going to affect the whole way of life.
The department has begun the process of slaughtering around 3,500 sheep and around 1,500 cattle within a 1 kilometre radius of the affected farm. All sheep within a further 2 kilometres of the farm are also going to be slaughtered. The worry now is that the slaughter could be extended even further to cover all 40,000 sheep in the Cooley Peninsula. The department says all the animals will be brought to a meat plant in nearby Ravensdale and slaughtered and then brought for rendering afterwards. Farmers such as brothers Peter and Patrick Traynor, who farmed in the area all their lives, face having their livelihoods wiped out.
Then the farming for us for until we can start off again, you know.
And do you think you'll be able to start again?
Well, I'd start again, like if I could, you know, if I thought it was, you know.
What else would you do?
What else can you do? We're not used to doing anything else, you know.
Orla O'Donnell, RTE News, Dundalk, County Louth.
The disappointment was evident on the faces of the Minister and senior officials at a lunchtime news conference. For almost a month, they had led the fight against the disease. But despite the best efforts of a nation, foot and mouth is here for the first time in 60 years. Mr. Walsh said the case at Proleek was a secondary to the outbreak a few miles away in Mai, County Armagh. And he was hopeful that the situation could be confined to a single outbreak. But he said an aggressive slaughter would get underway in the Louth area. 3,000 sheep and 1,000 cattle initially. Eventually, as many as 16,500 animals could be culled.
The bottom line is that this is a major disappointment for all concerned, for the country at large, for the agri-business, for the agri-tourism business, for sporting and cultural organisations, and I have particular sympathy for the farmers in the region.
The Department of Agriculture still doesn't know how the outbreak occurred, and they are said to be desperately seeking the source of the outbreak. The possibility that the virus was carried by air hasn't been ruled out. The Northern Minister promised to help discover the cause.
Well, my greatest concern at this stage is, first of all, urgently in coordinating with the Republic to find out the source of this particular outbreak and then to move immediately to ensure that we curtail it. I do not want to see us facing the disastrous situation which I've just had an account of across the water.
The IFA has described the Proleek outbreak as a body blow.
Well, certainly it's the last day that I wanted to see But I think, I mean, obviously we have to move on. We have an outbreak now. The fact that it's happened in the exclusion zone, I think, is the best possible scenario if we were to have an outbreak.
Mr Walsh was this afternoon briefed by his advisers on foot-and-mouth restrictions, but the scaled-down controls decided last week were deemed appropriate.
We felt that at least we were getting to the end of the line and that we were almost there. So it was particularly disappointing that at this stage, after so much effort by so many people and the citizens of the country, that we got this outbreak.
And what did you feel when you got the bad news this morning?
Well, it was a gutting situation.
Tonight, the EU agreed to restrict the ban on food exports to Louth only, which means that exports from other counties can continue.
Having considered it with some advice and in some detail, I was able to persuade my colleagues that it should be limited to Louth only, principally because of the strong response from the Irish government and the public authorities in Ireland, and indeed from the people in Ireland, that the high standard of protective measures that have been taken was such that it was possible to put in place a regional ban of such a small region. And I hope that that will remain in place as long as there are no other outbreaks.
The Taoiseach has postponed the Fianna Fáil Ardèche and has called on every citizen to participate in a redoubling of the national effort to fight foot and mouth. Joe O'Brien, RTE News.
Fears about the impact of foot and mouth wiped billions of pounds off the value of Irish shares today. The ISEC index plunged 5%. Meanwhile, the US Dow Jones Industrial Average slid 3% today, dashing hopes that global markets had reached the bottom.
Dealers, Queen speaking.
Irish shares were already suffering today in sympathy with global markets, but then came the bombshell. Confirmation of the foot and mouth case sent shares into a nosedive as investors fear the disease will hurt tourism, the airline industry and consumer confidence in general. Food stocks were among the worst hit. Golden Vale lost a fifth of its value. Glanbia, formerly Avonmore, dived 15%. It's already feared that the US slowdown will hurt Ireland's boom, but today the employers group IBEC and Goodbody stockbrokers said foot and mouth could wipe 2% off growth this year, down to 6% from 8%. Higher food prices would also feed into inflation. Some economists are banking on a European rate cut to ease the pain.
I think the one which is more difficult to quantify and to call is the foot and mouth situation, which will have a big knock-on effect possibly on tourism and internal movement and internal spending. So that will probably depress the economy to some degree in the first quarter of the year. But lower interest rates will eventually get the world economy moving again, and lower interest rates will help the Irish economy.
This outbreak comes at the worst possible time as US companies slash jobs and spark fears that Ireland's boom could be over. Small business associations have called on the revenue and on banks to be understanding with those who have cash flow problems. And the Small Firms Association has called on the government to go on a diplomatic offensive to ensure that our £11 billion food export business is not damaged. EILIS, Brennan, RTE News.